Wow, Rafa. What an explosion of adventurous scoring and, so many great ideas. And I mean, if anything, I feel that you're onto something with a lot of these approaches, and and a lot of these like the way you're thinking ahead and structuring things and so on. And I feel if there's any great issue with this score is that like some of those approaches just don't go far enough. Do you know what I mean? Like you'll start off some real incredible texture and then it won't follow through or it won't complete itself or something will be a little out of balance and it's easy to fix, but like I feel it, you don't spend the time on it that you would need to get it right. So there are a bunch of other issues too, but for this probably is going to be the most extensive of my evaluations here at the end, and maybe that's actually a really good thing that the very last one of these evaluations should really go into huge detail, and that there should be some developing orchestrator issues to solve, right? So it's not to say that you don't have a huge amount of talent and that you haven't been doing this for a while, but just to talk about some of those things that sort of touching base. If somebody were just to jump to the end and say like, what, I want to see what all this is about, then this would be a really great place to start, I think, because you give me a lot of stuff to talk about, which I think will be helpful for orchestrators across the spectrum, all right? As opposed to maybe perhaps more specialized, more kind of high-level orchestration concepts that we saw a lot of in these last few evaluations. Alrighty, but with that in mind, that means that the enhanced evaluation is going to be quite detailed. This is going to really be a lot like a coaching session, me sitting down with somebody and their score and really going into a lot of detail about little notation things, little questions of tuning, like maybe wrong notes or and so on. And that will all be, probably will spend almost an hour or possibly even more on those issues before we even get to going through the sections. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty long video, is what I mean. So, let's start with let's kind of jump back here and talk a little bit about the mock-up. All right, so for your mock-up, you appear to be using solo string sounds instead of ensemble string sounds, right? So the problem with that is, you might think, oh, I'm getting a much liver, more aggressive sound, but the problem is that it actually lessens the impact when you have any kind of ensemble playing, right? And it sort of confuses the dynamic and timbral balance. Like if you have this very, very kind of live, somewhat spicier kind of a sound in your strings, then it's really hard to get an orchestral feeling at any time. It just all ends up sounding like chamber music, right? And so that's one thing to watch out for. All right. Now let's talk about some more layout things. All right. Okay, so there's a bunch of confusion going on here with the horns, right? Here you say horn in F1 and horn in F, right? So when we look later on in this piece, we see that you actually intend to have a quartet of horns, right? So shouldn't this be horns in F1 and 2, horns in F3 and 4, right? Or you could simply have a bracket in this left margin and you could have a floating just horns in F. All right, and then we have the problem sort of compounded here. Let's jump ahead. Here you say D horn in F1, and then here D horn in F. All right, it should just be horn in D or horn in F, right? It isn't like it's either one or the other, right? However, if we look at the way you've scored this, we actually see that it is actually F horns, right? And just a further reading of the way this whole manuscript or this whole orchestration is dealt with, right? We've got we've got like alto saxophone, and we've got tuba, right? We've got all these percussion instruments, tom toms, harp, and so on. So, yeah, the orchestration of this really is sort of romantic to modern period in terms of its scope. So that means that you're not holding yourself down to any kind of like natural horns or whatever. Then you should just say that this is horns in F. Like just put a bracket here and just have horn in F or horns in F, right here, because you've already scored it in F. And you've scored it for fully chromatic valve horns, right? So there's no need to say D horn, or there's D horn doesn't even enter into it. And if you were going to use D horns, the purpose of those D horns would be to play natural pitches because they would be natural horns, right? Usually we don't I mean, in some later romantic scores you'll see like horns in E and they'll be chromatic horns or whatever. But really it should just be just horns in F, okay? Just stick to the modern approach. Okay. All right, so I go into big detail on this in my notes, which you can take a look at when we get to the end of this first movement's evaluation. I'll have just a huge list of notes for you to follow, because I am hoping, Rafa, even though this score is not, it's really not quite ready to go to the stands, right? A lot of these later scores have been in a much more complete state, and yours still needs a lot of work. But I'm still hoping that you will take the time to go through this as if it were going to be prepared, right? So I want you to go through that process. All right. Okay. Now let's sort of jump back. Okay, so F bass tuba. All right, this is just a tuba. All right, so like we could say, oh, I would really love an F tuba here, right? Which is a slightly smaller model than like the standard now is like the C, the big C double tuba, right? But the F has a beautiful sound, and it gets used a lot in certain applications. However, okay, it's really, really important for us to not dictate which tuba is going to be used in which score. That is for the player to decide. All right? Okay. And I think, like here, tenor trombone, I'm just going to quickly refresh my memory. Yeah, so here you say first trombone. So shouldn't it be two trombones? I thought I remembered seeing you asking for, see, like here you ask for two pitches in your, so that is trombones, right? You almost always are just using a single pitch, though, right? I think that might be the only instance, right? Now here you use two pitches, right? That's right. Okay. All right, so it would be two. And you don't even have to say tenor, right? Because we just assume that trombones are tenor trombones. That's the default. So just say two trombones, and then bass trombone. All right? Okay, now there's a ton of proofreading that you need to do. Okay, so you have to proof for stem directions and stem length. Okay, so for instance, here, stem length. You have this huge, long, so I would say just bring this up to, take this little beam right here should be on the bottom of the staff, right? And then stem direction, I mean, you have all of these reversals of direction all over the place, right? There's another one is, hang on. Excuse me, I'm just really checking quickly. Yeah, so oboes right in here, right? For instance, right? So the stem should be going up, right? So you should go through the entire score and you should correct for stem directions, right? Just make sure that the stem directions follow, like for instance here, right? These should all be stems up, right? Yeah, so just do the proofing that you should be doing. All right. then you need to proof for divisi and unison, right? So most of the time you get your divises, right? Sometimes you miss. Like for instance here, like this, obviously should be divisi. That's a huge stretch right in there. That would be difficult to score. Maybe it might be possible with thumb position or whatever, but it really should be should be divisi, just like you've scored here, right? But like the thing that is more important is unison, right? Like you almost never mark unison when you are canceling your divisi, right? So and you have to do that because people might take it for granted that that's just what you mean when you are finished indicating two pitches played at the same time, or two pitches occurring at the same time. So you might think, oh well, the players will just take it for granted. But a lot of times, like in a situation like this, especially when the players are just reading it, the lower player might drop off and just assume that the upper player is going to take whatever is happening, right? Like la meta, right, without having that written in. So you really have to write in unison just to really, really make sure. Okay. And then proof for dynamics on entrances, right? For instance, like jump ahead to bar 62 here for your timpani, right? The last time the timpani played, if we jump back, was where is it? Yeah, here. Like you had some mezzo forte pitches, right? So you can hear that um, your mock-up has no idea that maybe this should be piano or mezzo piano or something. It's not marked solo, so I'm assuming that this is piano, right? So yeah, so just really go through and just really mark, like really proofread all of the entrances, and you can do that just in the parts, right? Just go to the parts of each instrument, and if you have a long multi-rest or a long break, then just if you're missing a dynamic on the entrance, then that will tell you. All right. Now, yeah, but you can hear that this is totally out of balance the way that it's scored, unless you really intended for this to be a solo. Then there's like proofing, or actually, sorry. Yeah, so we talked about proofing. Let's talk about the alto sax. All right. So you throw in an alto saxophone here, and I think that's a wonderful idea. It's such a great instrument. But I'm just wondering, could you have not, could you have possibly used it as a solo voice more? Do you know what I mean? Like, could there have been, you know, could it have been highlighted better? Like saxophone in octaves with flutes is brilliant. Like, you could have given this to your alto saxophone, right? And what's a great example of that is Quartetto Zimbolico by Villa-Lobos, where it's for flute, alto sax, harp, and celesta, and wordless women's voices. Right? And it's an incredible piece of music. Someday I would like to do a score study on it, but Villa-Lobos uses flute and alto sax in octaves, and it's a wonderful effect because the alto sax brings out all of these wonderful, like it lends its overtones to the flute, and it just sounds brilliant, especially when the flute is in its middle, sort of middle upper register, that area in there that's kind of more delicate. Like you would see things start to pop, right? Just like turning this from oboe into alto sax. You get a lot of the benefit of stacking oboes under flutes, flutes over oboes. But then there's an even more of a wonderful little edge in there. So that's just like one example. But I felt that the addition of alto sax was great. but it's almost not justified because like you're constantly using it to just like sort of support things, fill things in, like for instance here, like I'll talk about this a little bit more, but this could have been great on alto sax, right? Okay. Now you add timpani tuning in a lot of places, like sort of telling the player how to set their kettles. That's really something more for like the composer themselves, especially a developing composer, to kind of take a note, like to make sure that you've got everything set up and that you're keeping track of the changes so you don't set an impossible situation up for your player down the road. However, it's like it's not really needed in the score and the part, except for like say like student players, community orchestra players, and so on. I'd say anybody at a professional level doesn't need this, so I would just leave it out of your final draft. And speaking of those changes, like you have so many different changes in your timpani part. It would be worth it once again for you to just open up your timpani part and to look at all the changes that you ask for. It's a very active part. These this I mean it's very very cute. Like a lot of these things. Yeah. So, but there's so much going on there in these kettles that you might find that the timpanist decides to use like 5 kettles, right? And they might even want to get like a a sixth kettle to handle like these top A's. And that is not to say that the top A is impossible to get on the highest kettle in a normal set. It's just that centering it, right? Like having a nice, beautiful ping. Like it doesn't sound as good on the highest kettle, on the highest normal kettle. It just sounds beautifully centered on a piccolo timpani. That's something that I've talked over with professional timpanists, and yeah, they just really tend to agree. Like once you get up to like G sharp, A, B flat, and so on, like the things that are possible on the high kettle just sound better on a piccolo timpani. Then let's talk a little bit about just general dynamics. Okay, you do have a lot of reliance on mezzo dynamics, and we have talked about this before, Rafa. Okay, so like you've got a lot of mezzo piano going on, and then piano subito, and which is great. I actually like that a lot. And then once again mezzo piano. Right, mezzo piano. If you're seeing mezzo dynamics more than you're just seeing straight dynamics, here we have mezzo fortes. If you're seeing mezzo more than you're just seeing piano or forte, then rethink your dynamics, because forte and piano are universes of color and strength, okay, or restraint. You don't need to be constantly moderating them, right? And just like saying, oh, this is a little more than that, and this is a little less, and blah blah blah. You can always go piano crescendo and piano the diminuendo and so on. You can be playing and sort of with the nuances of it. That's great, but you don't always have to constantly be going to mezzo dynamics, right? So just really think of, I'm not saying that you should never score mezzo dynamics. Mezzo dynamics are very important. They are an essential ingredient, but they cannot be a default, right? You have really, really got to stop defaulting to mezzo dynamics all the time, right? Just like, because part of that is it just happens a lot in piano scoring, like like almost all the notes in the piece are in the middle 3.5, 4 octaves of the piano, and a lot of the dynamics are mezzo forte and mezzo piano and so on. Okay, well, that can't be true for orchestral scoring, where the orchestral instruments are specifically designed to sound their best at piano or at forte, right? And centering your dynamic scope around those areas of piano and around forte really helps you to get like to differentiate between the two and to not always be fudging between the two and never really defining things as strong or as soft unless it's some sort of special effect or it's just coming making a loud ending or something, right? So seriously, Beethoven's simple effective dynamics are extremely important. I would say go back to those and rethink a lot of what you're doing here. Okay, then there is a lot of there is like a lack of a systematic approach to slurs, right? I mean, a lot of the slurs are kind of borrowed from the piano score, or just not included at all, like what you might think would be good. Like, do you really intend your bassoonist to go ta 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 ta? In the same here, you know what I mean? Like you have to think that there are absolute implications. Like if none of this is slurred, then the players will tongue each note separately, right? And the same thing, do you want all of your string parts to be ta 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 ta? Do you want everything to be, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, up, down, up, down, up, down, up? Do you see what I mean? Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? I mean, is that really what you want? Okay. So it's just da 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 as opposed to da 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 da, or like any number of different patterns. And then I'm seeing things like beautiful long slurs in the winds and nothing in the strings. What I mean, what, right? Right, so you just really, really need to just and you started off so wonderfully, right? So I just feel that you need to really go over this whole score, and and add a lot, you have about 20 to 30% the amount of slurs that you need, I feel. All right, so dovetailing. A lot of the times you get it right. Like, for instance, here. This is great. Dovetailing. You dovetail on the beat, and you have the same duration note in both parts, right? Okay. But here you have something where you go right? So this would be better off with both players playing the same note on the beat, like on the downbeat, and then the oboist continuing on with the clarinet having cut out, right? Just playing this written D as a 16th note, and then the oboist playing the same note, which would be C in concert pitch. Do you see what I mean? Especially in really fast music, it's really good to give the player the downbeat in these patterns, right? Which we might talk about a little bit more in the next movement. All right. Now, I love the fact that you included a harp, but I feel just like the alto saxophone, like it's a little underused. I think that you could have given it a lot more to do, and it's not just that that you're not using it that much. You're very rarely taking advantage of approaches where the instrument is at its strongest, right? Like what are things that the harp is just really, really strong at? It's like gushing chords, like big rolled chords. we're like hand over hand kind of rolled chords where like the left hand starts at the bottom and then the right hand comes in right over the top of it and then the left hand jumps above it and the right hand jumps above that, right? So you're covering like 3 or 4 octaves. Like that would be what I would call a gushing chord. Um, like patterns, for instance, you do like 1 or 2 little patterns, but like almost like very very few. Subtle coloration, right? Just more of that. There's one place where you're using like here you're using harmonics. That's very very cool. But I just feel like you just need more of that, more filigree. You could like the thing is that I feel that you are using the harp so seldom that it almost doesn't justify its inclusion, right? You could leave the harp part out almost entirely, and it wouldn't make much of a difference. So if that is the case, and if you're doubling a lot of what the harp does in ways that basically just swallow it up, right? Like for instance, like this left hand right in here will get swallowed almost entirely by the double basses. Like you really won't be able to hear the harp for its own sake here, right? So like if that is what's going on, then like the harpist is like they're playing a lot of stuff that nobody will ever hear, and so they why are they even there, right? All right, now one last little thing in my general evaluation notes here, and that is like what do you mean by X note heads, right? I'm wondering if this is something that's just sort of left over. If this was made in Dorico, for instance, like Dorico tends to like default to X note heads sometimes in cymbal parts and so on. So yeah, so usually like an X note head means damp for triangle, right? So I think you should still clarify exactly what you mean. There's another place that was a little unclear. Jumping ahead here. Yeah, so here we have a regular note head. Here we have an X note head. So I mean, what does that mean, right? Does that mean to damp as well? If you were to add like a general note, if you have a percussion score, right, and you have a general note that X note heads means to damp, and in all instruments except snare drum, it means rim shot, right? For instance, that would be one way of dealing with it. All right, those are my general comments. Now for the bar by bar evaluation. So this is going to take a while, all right? And then when we're through with that, I will talk about going through things section by section and giving you my general evaluation criteria. So like I said, this is going to be long, so just everybody buckle up, all right? But I think it's totally worth going through. Okay, here at bars 1 to 4, we have Adagio Cantabile 30. I love this tempo. However, there's no way that these violas can last. The duration does not match the carrying power of the instrument. Now, the question would be, well, should I just notate this as quarter notes? No, I feel that you should notate it as half notes the way that it is, but just write piano sostenuto, or P space and then SOS period, right? So piano sostenuto. And then the players will like do a little bit of vibrato to keep the note going, right? Now, cello can almost last the whole duration, and double bass no problem, right? That doesn't mean that the notes will be very strong by the end of the bar, but there will still be a little bit of sustain. Right? But all of these parts should say piano sostenuto on them, right? Just really, really, just you want them to carry. All right, now here you have a couple of bar rests, right? What's the problem here? Is that these players will count to 2, and then they're going to count 1, and then they're going to get lost in the worst possible situation. In most situations, they'll notice that the conductor is giving the preparation for the incomplete bar pickup right here, right? So, but this is also an incomplete bar, so it has to have a quarter rest. Now we have another problem right in here, and that is that you've got fermata on an eighth rest at the end on some of these, right? So this is the correct amount of beats in the bar. However, these players are not preparing to play on the pickup beat here, so they don't need to know that this is a fermata on that beat. All they need, like all of these blank bars, like here where you've got your complete bar rest, and here where you've got these 2 eighth notes, all of those blank bars should just have a quarter rest with a fermata over it, right? That's all you need, all right? Because none of these players are getting ready to do anything in the next bar. Like here, you're just going into the violins playing, right? So, and then I think you intend to push here. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but yeah. So just quarter rests with a fermata, I would say. Okay, and then here this is perfectly right. We have a quarter note with a fermata. And here you want the bassoons to let go, and then that's correct as well. All right, so that's all good. Okay. Now here, I'm wondering if I just mentioned that maybe you intend to push here, but like if you don't intend to push, if you just intend for this to go from pianissimo and start off at mezzo piano in the next bar, then there's really no need for the crescendo mark here, right? So if you're just going from pianissimo and then you're going to start at mezzo piano, that's totally fine. Right? And you don't even need to mark subito or anything like that. But if you really did intend to push here, then that's the correct notation. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Now, a little further, going to bar 6 here. Here you've got a B flat on the bottom. Okay, I think this should be a C, not a B flat, just as Beethoven has indicated. You're inverting the dominant 7th here. All right, and it's just too confusing for the harmonic flow, right? And we want to think about voice leading, right? So this sort of undercuts it, right? And especially if you are dipping down here to C's in the cello part, right? This really should just be a C as well in the double bass. I know you're trying to do something fancy here, but we don't want to subvert Beethoven too much, even though you're taking a more modern approach. Now, here you have a due bassoons in doubling a due clarinets in the tenor register. Like here's another example of stem directions going the wrong way. So here I would say you really should try not to have a due bassoons. It's a sort of a borderline issue. A due bassoons above the staff, right? It's always a little bit of a risk, right? Here you are doubling clarinets, and both of these parts are doubling the strings, right? So you might think, well, I've got a cushion here, so maybe it's not such a bad thing. But I just still feel it's easier for that single bassoonist to be doubling with the clarinets, right? And I feel it's less of a band sound, right? If it starts to cut through and overpower the strings right in here, then at least it's a more classical music type of a sound, right? Rather than a kind of a wind band sound. All right, and then I mentioned in my notes here that here's a great example of a place where you could have put in alto sax, right? You know, alto sax, right? I think that would be better than bassoon, especially since the next note is just this ba ba bum, right? All right, now jumping ahead a little bit here. A few issues with the percussion here. Now here you in your suspended cymbal, you say LV, like let it vibrate, right? There's a way of thinking about it in English, like just sort of. I would say in this style of music, just indicate how long you want it to be, right? If this is intended to last two beats, then just score a half note, right? If it's intended to last for the entire bar, just indicate a whole note, right? So just don't worry about finessing this. Just indicate the amount of. I mean, it's just better, right? Now here we have at let's see, bar 16, right? Hang on a second. Sorry, 17. There should be diminuendo hairpins on your trombone parts, right? Because otherwise this continues on louder than these other elements and then suddenly cuts off, right? That's clumsy. Diminuendo. And then give I would say diminuendo, and then at the end of the diminuendo indicate piano or pianissimo, right? Just so that we just know, like the player knows how far down they're going, right? Because actually pianissimo would actually be better, because then it would be kind of folding under the these other wind parts and so on, right? And not so not so obnoxious. And then here it's weird. You have this. You have mezzo forte in your bass drum and piano crescendo here, whereas everybody else is getting a little softer. This doesn't balance with what you've got going on here, right? And that just leads to the next question here, and that is, you are asking the bass drum to last for a full 4 beats. And the same thing with the snare drum. There's no possible way that a snare drum is going to sustain its pitch for 4 counts. Indicate both parts as a simple quarter note, and just let the room, the reverb of the hall will provide the sustain that's needed for the bass drum part. And the same thing could be said here. These should both just be quarter notes, right? Just keep it simple. All right, now we have a few bad notes. Actually, a couple dozen bad notes. B natural, right? Not B flat. In flutes, and then continuing on in your violin parts and so on, right? So all these B's should be flats, right? Because we have the voice leading, right? Da 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 da, not da da da. Da 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 da. Right, that's a little too modal, right? It's da da da, right? Because that strongly leads to the new tonal center of C, right? Okay. Now, I need a little thing, a way of keeping my place in my notes. All right, let's go ahead a little. 230 here, right? So clarinet 2 is starting a beat early, isn't it? Right, so it's da da da, ba 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 bum, starts on beat 3, right? Not on beat 1. Right? The way that this is scored, it it just kind of and then da 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 da, not da 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 da. This is a G, right? And then this is the equivalent of a G, right? Which would be written E5, right? Then jumping ahead a little bit to bar 34. Like here we have ba-da-dum in our kind of middle winds and timpani and everything here. But here we go. Nothing. What? What's going on here? You don't want to resolve in these in clarinet and flute or timpani? It really, like, if you were thinking, well, I just want to pull the rug out from under the listener. Well, if that's true, you need to at least supply some pitches that are in this register. Like I would say, whether you add winds here on the, like if you say, oh, oops, I forgot to do that, Thomas, you're right. So let's say you do add the winds here. Whether you add them or whether you just say, well, I do want to just go straight to pizzicato there. One way or another, this C sharp D thing and A G thing should be doubled in first violin divisi, right? And then the resolution, the high resolution, should be also in first violins up in that register, right? Otherwise, it's just like you're pulling the rug out way too far from the listener. Yeah, but I just feel that the best solution is to have the first violin doubling first flute and first clarinet, and for everybody to resolve on the downbeat here, including the timpani. All right. Then at 36th, all right, so just to start before, clarinets. And we need to get from here to there. Da 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 da. What does Beethoven do? He goes down, right? So that we can hear this coming. Okay, but instead you have this da 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 da. I mean, and this is a cool idea if it weren't for the fact that the bassoons have to start here, right? So, like hitching over the top like this with your oboes takes attention away from the fact that this line is leading to this low part here, right? So I mean, it's a cool idea, but I mean, wouldn't it be better to just have like maybe second clarinet or alto sax, maybe even more, give it more things to do to lead the focus of the listener downwards towards the bassoon solo, right? Okay. All right, so now let's jump forwards here. All right, now we have a little problem here, and that is in terms of the balance of the musicians. Da 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 da. I mean, there's some cool ideas here, but like just the problem is that the alto sax is so much more powerful than the flutes, even though it's like not really playing in the same exact register. The fact that the flutes are in a weak register and the alto sax is so close to them, and you've got horns pushing forwards to mezzo forte under them, it just really means that, especially getting towards the end here, and like you go all the way down to a trill on a B flat, this is really going to become inaudible. Like what you're hearing in your mock-up is a lie. It's like the flute is just not going to come through very well there. All right. So I just I would say rethink this. Like clarinets would work better here. I would say, just like in terms of being able to work with the alto sax better. For instance, that's one solution. Okay, and then we have a problem here. And this is an example of what I was talking about at the beginning. Like you have these really great ideas, and then you don't complete them, right? You have a lot of things where you just break the phrase. You don't come to an end, right? One thing that you'll notice in Beethoven's accompanying phrases to his melodies is that he'll end on the downbeat, right? Especially in this piece, right? But you can't just pull that. You can't leave out that completion, right? Because the audience just doesn't feel like anything ever finishes, right? Like so, for instance, here, wouldn't it work better if like your lower bass and accompaniment, your bass accompaniment instruments, like ending on an A flat, like these horns and these lower strings, right? And then your melodic instruments maybe ending on a C, da 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 da, right? All right, now we have a balance problem here. Starting off here, this is really lovely. I mean, this will come off pretty nicely, but the oboe is so much more pungent than the harp that it really requires. And these shouldn't these be slurred? I mean, or do you really want? Do you know what I mean? I think da is better, and it's also works better with the harp. So that pushing forward to forte. By the time we get to here, it'll be very very hard to hear the harp. And as I mentioned before, like these notes down here will be invisible compared to these octaves in the lower strings, right? So maybe you don't need to crescendo, or maybe I don't know. Just like maybe there's some way. Like, see, this is a good place. Like, let's say that this was turned into a clarinet part, right? And then it resolved to a C. What if this was on flute, right? That would make much more sense with harp. The harp would be completely audible. Now, whenever you have something like this where you have a hairpin, you have to indicate how loud the player taking over will be playing, right? So would it be mezzo forte by here or mezzo piano or something? Right? You have to indicate when there's you can't just assume this. Like, wait until you try to extract parts and you immediately run into the problem, right? And you have to, of course, tell the player who's stopping playing how loud they're going to end at, right? So whatever happens, it has to indicate here. But anyways, I think this would be way better on flute. But I really love this being mezzo forte and then the forte coming in. I'll talk more about that when we get to it. Okay. Then at 45, like these 16th notes here in the cellos, you just have to think, how fast are these players plucking? That's really not. That's not. It's possible, but it just won't have the same clarity, right? This is way better on harp, right? I think that the harp could have continued on here. And then there's like another issue that this should be an F sharp, right? Not an F natural in the oboe. All right, and then like at 46, like right in here, da 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 da. What? Like, what does Beethoven do? He finishes the phrase, right? So these, like, it's the same problem as right here. Like, these instruments should finish on the downbeat, even if it's soft, right? Just like they're playing loud and then they play soft, but at least you have the continuity of the texture, right? And the same thing here, right? These people should finish playing so the texture finishes even if it's soft, right? So these just go one more beat and just like, add a supporting chord, and then just let the harp and so on take it from there. And this is an example. This won't be heard at all behind the force of the oboes and the clarinets, right? So maybe it'd be better for the harp to continue playing patterns and then come in here with this delicate stuff. All right, and then speaking of the harp, maybe from here, this would be better off in octaves, or maybe throwing in a chord at the beginning of the bar, or just like if there's some way to make the harp part a little bit more active here, because you have to differentiate it from the pizzicato going on. Like the pizzicato will tend to absorb anything that is happening in the harp if the harp isn't slightly bigger here, right? So the harp part needs to, maybe chord and then playing chord, then playing single notes and so on. Or maybe octaves, right? Maybe you could play octaves and maybe even throw in a little chord in the left hand on the downbeat. There's a lot more you could be doing with the harp. Okay, and then jumping forward, speaking of glissando, this could be a simple line here, from F down to B flat. And it's almost a little too slow to be a glissando. Maybe it would be better to start an octave higher and then go down to an octave lower on a B flat, right? So you just get that more kind of a feel. All right, now, speaking of which, I feel like this downward rushing passage could be a lot fuller, right? I feel that, it starts to build and it starts to build. Alto sax isn't doing anything, though. Strings aren't doing anything. And then here, you only get up to a mezzo piano. And then there isn't even a crescendo here. And then suddenly you're at mezzo forte pushing forwards, which will get, these lower winds will get completely blasted out of the water by the horns and the trombones. Right? So I just think there's a lot more you could be doing here. Strings, the strings could be carrying the general, they could have the continuity. These other parts could be dancing around it, right? The way that you've got it scored, I think that's great. But you could have more strings added, right? You could have your brass pushing at a chord rather than playing fast notes. And then when it comes in here, everything comes together, right? I would say push your strings up to a forte and maybe mezzo forte in a full brass chorale here. Or maybe push forwards to a fortissimo with forte in the brass, right? And then coming out of it, we need a diminuendo, right? You don't want ba 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 da da da. If the wash left over from these brass still playing loud will cover the soft entrance, right? So you have to diminuendo if you want clarity here. All right, and then right here, these flutes are almost completely invisible. It's funny that this drops down here, and I'm wondering if this was intended to maybe be in clarinets or oboes or something like that. But yeah, this would be way better in clarinet. And then that way, this can be much more individual. This is so fantastic here. This this is one of your best ideas right in here. It's really, really lovely. Okay. Then, yeah. All right. And I will talk about other issues to do with this when we get to the evaluation criteria. Okay. Yeah, and then don't forget your dynamic entrance here. Now, yeah, we've got more problems here. This is all good here. This stuff going on here gets a little weak right in here with your flutes. This could be a great place for the oboes to come in and support this a little bit. But the big problem is this. Dun, dun, dun. Nobody's going to hear this flute. Odd duet flutes, doesn't matter. Nobody's going to hear them. This should be played on second trumpet. So this part here could be first trumpet as you have written, and then adding on top of that this little E flat F G thing, right? And then we have the same problem here. Bum, bum, bum. This is not going to pop against all of this. And now your trumpet's not doing anything. Just give this to the trumpet, right? And then same thing here, right? This should be a trumpet part. Yeah, it goes up to B flat. That's fine. All right. All right. And then, like, shouldn't this be treble clef right in here? I don't know why we suddenly got a bass clef here. But yeah, treble clef. And I think that, like, here, these widely spaced chords are just not going to pop very well, even though you've got soft oboes and bassoons and so on. I think like a big rolled chord, like hand over hand, 3-octave chord, would work great here and great, like even better there, right? When the hands are way far apart, it especially in this last chord, it's kind of harder for the harpist to negotiate. I think like hand over hand chords work a lot better. I mean, not that this is that far apart. It looks enormously far apart. If you in terms of the like the fact that we don't have a treble clef here, and thinking that it were treble clef, it would be even further apart, right? But it isn't, right? It's actually not that far apart, but it still is not that convenient. And then, yeah, same thing. We need a treble clef right in here. All right. All right, now we have a problem here. We have a triad, right? And so, like, obviously, you don't have 3 oboes. So just cut the top pitch, leave that with the flutes, right? And then here you can go to a duet, because, like, you shouldn't double your second flute with your first oboe, right? Right? Just, remember my "Don't Bury Your Flutes" video, right? Okay, this should be, yeah, just try to keep stuff up right in here, just like higher pitches and so on, and in this kind of, especially with horns below and so on. I mean, I'm glad that you're trying to balance things here, like mezzo forte, horns, and forte wind. So this is a great example of mezzo dynamics being very essential, right? It's good to kind of bring the horns down a little bit in this kind of configuration. All right, and then here, this is kind of the same problem as here. Like you don't have 2 alto saxes, right? And here you have pitches that are, it's really kind of similar to the clarinets, right? So or the same as the clarinets. So just cut this. You don't need, like, this will blare, right? Just cut it, right? Just leave it to the clarinets. Then when we get to here, try to beam across the rests, right? You don't have to put a partial beam here, but I would say beam across the rests. It's just easier to read, especially in a sight reading session, which might be the only way that you get this read. Like it. I think it would be great if it were performed, but it might only get a reading, right? So if that's the case, and the player's looking at it for the first time, and everybody's doing their best, then yeah, just try to try to do the beam groups solidly with the rests, incorporated, above the beam and so on. Then here I would definitely don't spare. There's no need for you whatsoever to not give the downbeat here, right here on this E, right? So that should be included right on here. The first flute should be doubling the E. And of course you should beam across this as well, right? I prefer to have like 2 16th notes, or 2 16th rests, rather than a eighth rest in this situation. Like this, you shouldn't syncopate rests. All right. Then, kind of getting to the end here, we have a kind of a strange thing happening here. The strings come in here, and we sort of have some of this rhythm continuing, like that was playing before. Bum 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 dun dun dun, right? But like your strings here don't have the strength and the sonority that that especially alto sax and bassoon have, right? and then like the bridge here to you know, going to the horns. I think that you should just continue on your lower winds here and then finish just like double, you know, like dovetail into the horns, or sorry, the trumpets and trombones. Forgive me. All right. Now, yeah, so we've got some problems right in here. This should be A flat, right? On beat one, not waiting till beat two, correct? And then these should be D flats, not just D's. So that's why this sounds so funky in the mock-up. Then I would say here, like once again we have a like a dropout, right? And this is my fault to an extent, like saying fortissimo here and then forte there. I got them mixed up. I'm sorry that was in the that somehow slipped into the template, right? So this should be crescendo to forte and then fortissimo in the last bar, right? So yeah, so there's no need for you to pull out here with the brass. I would say go ahead and continue on with this accompaniment and keep it full, right? Same thing, bass drum. Maybe bass drum could come in here instead of here. All right, so here we have like a really wild trombone part. So I mean, this is all possible, but it's just not very elegant. I would say this is better off on first and third horn, right? And then same thing with this bass trombone part. It's not the greatest bass trombone part. This would be better off on just trombone or maybe on second and fourth horn, right? So yeah, I would say like this. Give this to the high horns and this to the low horns. That's like the best possible. I think it's the most balanced kind of use. And then here, at the end, you could go into chorale like with your lower winds here. All right. So we have another one of those. Da da nothing. Right, so the upper winds are not going to finish? It doesn't make sense to me. Right? Shouldn't they end? Right? It's okay. Like they could the clarinets can end here and then go a due. Like keep in mind, a due is going to be very phased sounding, right? It might be better off to have just a single clarinet player. And once again, like here's where, you know, we're missing a lot of like I think slurs would really work great here. All right. All right. So as we get to the yeah, so you know here I see that you kind of want to go to clarinets here, and then you come over the top. So like the problem with this is that it sort of stays in the same place, right? It doesn't, like in the original part, it starts high, say maybe in the flutes, and then it works its way downwards. But here you're starting off in the clarinets because like you don't want to have to pop out these really high pitches here. You know, impossibly high in the clarinet. I can respect that, and you want a different color, right, than just flute again. But you might not have any other options but to have it in flute, right? because the way that this is, it's really not going anywhere. It's just sort of staying in the same place and staying in the same place. And then we get to the same thing, and it really stays in the same place again, coming over the top. And here we have a push forwards, and then suddenly a bassoon coming in here, and it's just so quiet. You cannot hear it, right? So this push forward here to a rest, and then the entrance here of this first bassoon is just going to be invisible. Is there any way of working our way down from on high and getting lower and lower and then working our way down to the bassoon? Yeah, and then here's another example of an A that would might cause the timpanist to want a piccolo kettle just to get a better sound. And yeah, that we need a treble clef here, right? And we got a few weird pitches here. Yeah, okay, so on this fourth beat here, we got some problems. All right, so for some strange reason, we go to a D natural here, right, which is not reflected in the wind parts, right? So this is a B flat minor chord, right, which needs its D flat. But here we have you're scoring a B flat major chord, and maybe this is just a simple error or whatever, just a little typo. Then here you have a chord written here for your violas. You just do not need a chord. You just might as well just stay there with a D flat, right? And if you want this higher B flat pitch, you've already got it in the violins, but if you really do want a quarter note on that, you could give the F and the B flat to your second violins, and that's a good bridge forward to this octave here, right? Okay, and then next page. Okay, so glissandos. This is difficult to do glissandos going opposite directions and like that, first you're going opposite directions, then you're going the same direction and so on. This takes a bit. It's not the most natural thing to do, but I would try to score this with lines rather than and then like maybe give the player a little bit further to go rather than just, and this of course should be in treble clef, right? Yeah, it's not the most obvious thing for the players to change directions, right? To go opposite direction glissandos are fine, but then sort of changing direction with one hand halfway through it is not the most obvious thing to do, and also just having such a short distance to travel. Better for glissandos to cover more ground, right? This way you get more of a rippling effect. This lower glissando might just be completely swallowed up by what's going on the bassoon. In fact, what you're doing down here is completely distracting from the bassoon, right? Maybe it's better just to have the higher glissando in the right hand with a treble clef. Okay, and then one last little thing here, as I've mentioned several times, is people are preserving Beethoven's staccato, which of course, fortissimo staccato on a piano has a really different sound, and in that classical style, right, of short notes rather than bouncy notes. But like in orchestral notes, or in orchestral pitches, it sounds a bit like a kind of a bunny hop, right? And we want this to be very emphatic. So I would say accents are better, or a marcato, right? So a marcato is like a short, emphatic note, right? It's like getting punched in the face, right? It's not like having somebody hopping merrily through the grass, right? So yeah. All right, so those are my extensive evaluation notes for your enhanced evaluation. Obviously the score is really not quite ready for that stage of getting it ready to be performed and everything. There's still a lot of work I think you would need to do on this to make it ideal. However, let's jump back to the beginning. Starting at A, we run into the question of whether the intro sets the mood effectively. And I have to say that it does. once again, I sort of wonder, what would it have sounded like with like alto saxophone down here, taking this clarinet line, right? I think that would have also sounded very cool. But I do like the really light configuration here. And one little thing that I think you should try to aim for here is to try to have uniformity in your slurs, right? So here we have dun ta 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 ta. So that all works great. But here we have ta. So ta 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 ta. All right. So this should really slur. This should slur to this. Then no slur there, right? So it just has to be absolutely, all together, right? Just everybody. And I'm wondering whether or not this really needs to stop before the end here. I noticed that like you're not really ending, like you're sort of ending with a kind of a suspension here, right? You're here we've got this little B flat fifth here and a B flat fifth there. So I guess you were thinking like, well, you're resolving forward, but then you're going forwards to yet another suspension, right? A different kind of suspension. So like a suspension of the two rather than of the four as it is here, right? So it gives this real unsettled sound, and if you were intending for this to really end like and feel like you're coming to an end on an F chord, then it would have been better for this to be an A sixth in both places, and then for this to be like a third, or maybe this could be a C sixth and this could be an F fifth or something, right? But I mean, I kind of like the suspensions. They give it a really cool modern sound. And I already talked about marking this sostenuto, right? Just P sauce period for this pizzicato, and you'll get like kind of nice long vibrato plucks. So like with those caveats in mind, I don't really think that there's a whole lot left to do. Plus, like, remember I said to put in quarter notes with fermatas, or quarter rests with fermatas, and all of these blank bars, right? I mean, there is something that like maybe the conductor might actually throw a little bit of rallentando right in here, da 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 da, just like really, really trying to get a lot of juice out of the middle of this bar. And if you wanted to give them permission to do that, you could just write it in, right? But other than that, I think it's nicely balanced. Like this C, though it is in the middle register for your first flute, it'll still be heard very well because of the kind of the more controlled, like these lower winds here can sound a lot softer, right? Yeah, and I just feel it works really, really well. And here I think you're wise to not have parallel turns, right? The turn on this is just kind of awful. I would, in your score, just try to position the turn a little after. You can hear how the mock-up is attempting to interpret it, right? It's just right on the beat, da, right, rather than da da. So just really, if you really want that da kind of sound, then just put it over here where it belongs, right? Just a little after the beat, so that there's no question that we want to hear the main note before the turn, right? Okay, so that ticks that box. I feel that the intro is done pretty well. Now, going onwards from this, does the melody start with elegance? Right? Is there a natural flow? Is there a natural transition to octaves? And do you expand without clogging up? Okay, well, like you do some things that are a little different, like, throwing in these pitches right in here, the way that this descends right in here with at the kind of harmonizing with the basses. That's very, very cool. The main thing is just to make sure that this pedal F right in here maintains its strength. This is a place where I don't think it would hurt to just have like harps kind of just doubling the Fs, just F, 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 and maybe even adding bassoon as well, just to double this, F pitch going on in here, and what is also expressed in the score, right? Anything that's expressed in the score. Probably good enough just to have these F pitches right in here, and maybe, I don't know why this is coming in late, but just, but the F in here as well. And then you could throw in a C, not a B flat here. So it's, I don't know why, like if you have this set up the way that it is, you are giving, like I can see the way that you have harmonized right in here. But if you look at every other pitch in your violins, you can see that the seconds are basically just playing the lower part of the octave of the firsts. So you end up something that's very strong in the middle and not so strong at the top, right? So if you want these lines to balance, just get rid of this lower part, except for maybe in here, right? So just like, functionally speaking, you could have put the C on, you could have had an E6th here, right? Because the thing about it is that we just don't have, we've got the C down here where it belongs in the original chord, but it could be, since you're spreading the B flat up to here, we could put that B flat second an octave higher, right? And it wouldn't hurt anything. So just turn this into a C6th, right? And then this pitch down here could just be a B flat, right? And that would be a nice way of spreading it out across the octaves. There's a bunch of different ways of doing this. You've seen, and I hope you will have looked at some of the other evaluations and seen for yourself. So but like elegance, I don't think we're quite there yet, because like everything is bowed separately, right? Down, up, 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 down. This is like, it's kind of choppy. Do you see what I'm saying? What if you put a slur on this? Ta, and then slurred, like try to have two bows per bar, right? Ta, ta, like up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Do you see what I mean? Just like, it just has a much better flow to it. And then right here, where you've got three C's in a row, you could turn this into portato, right? You could have tenuto marks with a slur over it, right? And then you get this kind of a sound, right? And then with these, like da 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 da, this could all be slurred, right? Ta 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 ta, and then when this comes in, ta 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 ta. See what I'm saying? Like it could be, and then down here, like this could even be portato down here. Right? Just to make everything float a little bit more. So I would say, with the addition of some judicious slurs, they don't have to be exactly what I've said, but so then I would say that there would be a flow here. Does this expand without clogging up? Yeah, more or less. I mean, I really love the way the bass moves down in here. That's very clever. Right? I don't think many people did that. It's very, very nice. So I would say adding some slurs, I would say that's elegant. Natural transition to octaves, more or less. Expanding without clogging up and natural flow, yeah, just add some slurs, please. Some portato here, perhaps. And that takes us to the next issue, and that is our leggermente, which you have added here. I notice you're using an E instead of an A. I think it's supposed to be A, leggermente. And do you really want ta ta, or do you want ta 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 ta? Do you see what I mean? Certainly here with your strings, I feel that you should slur by the beam group, right? Up down up down up, and that up bow here makes perfect sense. You don't have to mark the up bow and the down bow marks, but I'm just saying you plan it out, right? So if this is going to be, if you're going to go obviously up here, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, then this will obviously be an up, down, up. And then they'll just do another up, down, up, right? So anyway, so I would say, like, I think you want this to be slurred, right? And a due um, in your winds makes sense, like, because you want a nice, beautiful, thick sound out of your strings. And to the extent that that thicker sound is different from what happened before, the smoother, more elegant sound, without any kind of wind or brass accompaniment, I would say that this does contrast. It's just a little heavier, right? But one thing that is missing here is that, like, these cellos here probably could be doubled by one or two bassoons, right? So that you get the same thickness, right? So just thinking about it, octaves with flutes and oboes and first and second violins, and then cello and bassoons. So a question of whether or not you want to contrast between slurs in the upper parts and maybe individual strokes in the lower parts, da 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 or da da, right? So yeah, you don't really contrast between the lines. Like you pretty much just position them in the same parts as they were before, but just climbing up a step, right? You know, and then down in the cellos. So with all that in mind, I would just say, yeah, that pretty much ticks the boxes. I think that's really nicely done. Now, do you really want this to be separately tongued, separately bowed strokes? Do you want it to be yeah da 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 da, and then here you have staccato yeah da 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 da? So do you want it to be not staccato and then staccato here, or maybe it should all be staccato, right? I would say that if you add slurs the way I suggest here, and make sure that you have slurs that match in winds and strings, then this being separate bows doesn't feel as choppy as it would be if the strings had no slurs at all, right? All right. But it's kind of cool the way this comes in. I would recommend the clarinets coming in doubling the first and second violins right here, right? Now the way that this is scored, your strings are going to absorb the sound of the flutes above. Well, maybe not too bad a due, right? And if they're playing more emphatically, then maybe the flutes will cut through a little bit better. But this, the heavy strings like this, you basically are tripling the strings by you have three groups of strings all playing together down to this B natural by the time you get to here. Yeah, it's going to be pretty heavy. This also is going to need to have a crescendo mark, won't it? And why are these parts going crescendo forwards and these parts just stopping halfway through the bar? What if everybody did a crescendo to the fourth beat and you marked the actual force of that, like say up to mezzo forte? Da 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 da. I would be totally behind that, right? So mezzo forte by the fourth beat in all parts, just stop the crescendo there, right? And yeah, correct the direction of the stems, right? And you know what? Like, once again, this would probably work better in alto saxophone. I mean, you've got it, right? Yeah, and now we've got clarinets, sax, bassoons all together with the strings, and I think that you scored this really nicely. I think it really has a nice like pastoral kind of a quality, and just good use of of the saxophone in there, very subtle. Right? And then this is very cool. Just a little bit of trombone and lower winds. The one thing I wonder is, like, here you've got slurs, and it's a reacting phrase, right? Or sorry, it's sort of a primary phrase. This is the reaction, right? So the two chords are the reaction. So bum bum bum, strings and winds, and then we have lower winds and trombones and timpani. Bum bum, and then you have da da dum. Staying with these instruments, couldn't we jump back to winds and strings? Da da da, and then have the oboe come out, right? Either that or winds and strings, then reacting with trombones and lower winds and so on. Couldn't we go back to the strings and winds in this bar? And then the other issue is, here you have these slurs. Couldn't this be slurred as well? Right? Wouldn't that more accurately, like having the da 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 da, right? To have kind of a there's just more work to be done on this, I think. All right, that takes us to B. Ba, da, 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 da. Maybe this this A right here could be played. Maybe you could divide up the chord a little bit in a different way. You got a saxophone, right? So what if you had the F and the A in bassoon, like the way you got it, this sounding C played by alto saxophone, and then G third, so in other words, like an A third, giving us the C, or sorry, an F third, I meant to say, giving us the A here. Bonk. And then oboe solo can just start on the second beat. Really, that's really where the solo starts, right? Is on the second beat. Da 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 da. And this one, don't forget to put in the little trillo, right? Because it's da 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 dum, right? It's not da 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 da. It's da 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 dum. Sorry about my horrible singing, but you get the idea, right? So the trillo, like it has two shakes, and on the second shake it turns, right? All right, complementary timbre. You've got your little stack of thirds right in here, or it's really like doubled, right? There's a risk here that the lower pitch here in these thirds is going to come out stronger, right? Because you've got trombone sitting on it. You could completely cut the trombone here if you wanted to. Or you could have this played, you could have this doubled by horn, but then what do you need the clarinets for, right? So, like, it's a risky choice, but I'm not going to say to not do it. And don't forget the diminuendo here, like I said before. Right? Now, I have a little problem here with mezzo forte on your bass drum against pitches that are in the other, or a texture in the other instruments that only gets up to mezzo piano. This bass drum is going to be so heavy, right? So I would say I would keep it at like piano, right? It's going to be loud enough, especially with the accents. And here I would group your beam groups, just like crossing under the rest in the lower part. The upper part doesn't need it. Now, there's no reason why this pattern couldn't just continue till right here, right? I would just keep it going until we get to and then here you could have them go a duet, right? There's zero need for your second flute to be just completely wasted here, right? Like, I mean, what is the purpose of putting second flute on this D with the two oboes, where it'll just completely get sucked into their world and just disappear, right? And also, we have a crescendo here, forwards, to what dynamic? So is this mezzo piano? Right, this needs to be clear, and this is mezzo piano crescendo to what? So the dynamics here need to be worked out and balanced and defined a little bit better. Right? I would try to have them all play the same dynamic, right? So maybe they all go crescendo to mezzo piano. So maybe this could be piano crescendo to mezzo piano. Right? Anyhow, yeah, you work it out. And then we talked about the fact that this needs to be B natural, not B flat. Right. Yeah, the timpani is very, very cool right in there. I like the simplicity in here. I've made comments before about kind of the need to have a sort of a snarly dissonance resolving each time, but I don't think you need it with the way that you've got everything set up here. This is your own color. Just, I think you should stick with it. Right? So this is the point at which we think about the texture widening a little bit, but you've kept it so discrete that I don't think that that's necessary, right? And you could keep the pattern going right into here. Like here we have things starting to spread out. I think some of these pitches, a broader sense of harmony could be expressed here, right? So that we really are building forward, and they're like, it's much more, so that these pitches aren't coming out of nowhere, and also we don't end up with zero representation in the winds here, which could be, doing more, right? So rethink, right? This, perhaps some of these lower pitches could be traded off between clarinets, right? I mean, there's a lot you could still do. And I don't know why the flutes have to disappear. They could keep going a little bit to support what's going on here. So yeah, I think this needs to be a little bit bigger, to really fulfill the promise of your ideas. It's like that's kind of like, what would I say, in terms of like what you could do more, right? That's I think your textures could be a bit grander, and I think you could set them up a little bit more deliberately, right? There could be a little bit of brass in the background here. There could be more wind engagement going through to the final chord, right? So it really is a nice big tutti at the end. And you might get a lot more out of this with a timpani roll on the G, right? Rather than just hitting a fifth, which is only going to last a couple of beats anyways. Yeah, there's a lot more to do here. But it's still very cool. And that takes us to C. Da 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 dum. And that's kind of a nice transcription, just like the left hand on the right hand. The right hand on oboe and the left hand on clarinet. Why does the clarinet have no slur on it, right? We have to think about our slurs. And then flute doubling oboe. So what's going to happen here is that as the flute descends down into this area here, it's really just going to disappear, right? Against the real fat oboe. So what might be a better idea is to get a sort of a bit of an overlap here. Maybe take it all the way up to this C here, and then have just like on the last three notes, the oboe fades out, and then just rest until here, and then have the flute come in, and then crescendo into it a little bit, say. Right, and then, and then continue on. So so start at piano and crescendo up to mezzo piano or even mezzo forte, right? And going on to this, because like if the flute is mezzo forte, then it can really, once it goes down to its lower register, it will be a good balance against the bassoon. But the way that it is now, you really don't even need the flute here, except like if you want to leave it the way that it is, that's fine, but just being aware that this is just adding a little bit of extra color at the beginning and then sort of disappearing towards the end. Now here we've got oboe and alto sax, which I think is a very, very cool idea. Make sure that the clarinet starts a beat later, right? Like it should. And then bum bum bum. Yeah, it's all very cool, just all in the winds. And then yeah da 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 da. What? Where's my resolution in the winds? We talked about this before, right? All right. Yeah. And also in the timpani, right? So I gave you really thorough instructions about what to do here. I think if you use them, they could be very good for you. And then shouldn't this be slurred? Da da da. Maybe slur, 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 right? Same thing here. Slur to there. And then this note here on the clarinet should just be a 16th note long, right? That's it. Yeah, and this is going to be so cute. So, like the clarinet is the nightingale of the orchestra, right? According to the late classical to romantic period, Beethoven through to Brahms, right? That's what they considered. So yeah, so that really fulfills this, but I would definitely put like some slurs on here. Yeah, maybe slur that. See if you just slur this and then slur by the beam group, and then so maybe slur over one, and then slur this, and then slur over this, and then here, as I said before, But here's where I feel that this should be dropped an octave and given to alto sax or to second clarinet, right? And doubling the cellos rather than going over the top and then making this very unimpressive down here on second bassoon. Yeah. So at the beginning here, we need to have a second voice rest as a half rest, right? And then this whole rest should be centered. The bar rest should be centered in first voice, right? There's a bunch of weird stuff here in the rests and so on. Okay, and then these little salzedo brushes are nice. In harp writing, it's just like piano writing. The dynamic goes in the middle between the two bars. All right, so yeah, and yeah, you don't need to write LV that just the players know, right? Yeah, just have it as long as you want them to last, right? If you want this to be a whole note's duration, just write in a whole note, right? If you want this chord to continue, just tie the B flat forwards to a quarter note on a B flat, right? And then the harpist will let this go, right? Yeah, it's kind of cute little chuckling part right in here. Right, and then going back into here, don't forget, if you're going to take my advice and add some slurs, then don't forget to put them here as well, all right? All right, so that takes us not to D on the next screen, but we're going to jump forward to E. Oops, did I miss it? Right, here we go. I didn't see it because you dropped it down to here, right? So it should be up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the recapitulations to what happened at the beginning, right? And then we'll come back and we'll look at D at the end. So let's do that. Let's look at let's review, right? We had all strings, right? And then I recommended, hey, add some slurs to this, and the accompaniment and the melody and so on, and then it will be smooth and elegant, etc. And then for the leggermente part, you had flutes and clarinets and octaves, doubling the first and second violin, with the cello reacting below, which I said probably double that with bassoons if you're going to double the top parts with the higher winds. And then here we had flute coming in on top and so on. I said to double that with clarinet as well, right in there and so on, and that this would be better off in alto sax. And then here you had like winds and strings, and then just everything in like percussion and trombones, lower winds, and so on, timpani. Okay, all right. So now let's see how this was done in Rafa's score at E. You know what? I'm getting messed up with this E being down here. All right, so just watch out for that. Like really, proofread your scores. Like make sure that this things like this, because you can see how it just ends up wasting time, right? If I can't find it right away, All right. So here I would say normalize this, right? There's nothing at E that's saying to go duh, right? I think it's just better. It's like easier for the player to like I would only do this with like Pink Panther type stuff, duh, 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 right? Slurring forward to the on beat, right? But here, this isn't Pink Panther at all. So probably better to have a slur that goes from here to there, and then just slur the way that I recommended, right? So, ta 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 ta. So we can see that this is, aside from the weird slurs and the triplets coming in here, this is very much like it was before, right? And then once again, what's down here should be a C, not a B flat. But aside from that, and then like here you got a different configuration of the chord here, and you've got sixths here and so on, and then like you've got a triple octave, which I think is kind of cool. So looking at it, we've got the you've got your horns, right? Ba da 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 da. They're really, they're kind of doubling what's going on here in the viola and the lower second violins. So when you've already got a lot of weight on that, right? Maybe maybe all you need is a triple octave just scored normally, right? Just like have this line on the viola, have this upper line on the second violins, and then have the top line on the first violins, and then you just get the clearest, cleanest, strongest, most continuous sound, right? As opposed to sort of splitting it up, divisi in so many parts, right? And then I think that it would go very, very well along with the trumpet and horn and everything else, right? Third horn doubling first, and then the second below, and so on, right? And then bassoon right in here. So, yeah, slurs. Everybody gets some slurs, and this is so cute right in here. This and this could also be slurred. Right? All right, and that takes us to here. Oboe and clarinets. Clarinet. I'm assuming this is clarinets a deux or first clarinet or something. Should be leggermente still, right? Right, so you're just really keeping it like viola, doubling clarinet, and the cello below, and so on. What if this viola part were doubled by alto saxophone instead of second clarinet, right? I'm not trying to rewrite this. I'm just trying to help you find places where you can bring in more alto saxophone. And I just love this line right in here with the low horns and the second bassoon. Really, really, and this could totally be slurred. I would say slur like this, maybe slur up to here. Go ahead, don't worry about crossing there. So slur up to there, slur up to there, and actually just, yeah, and then just end with a low B flat. Yeah. And bass trombone, you could just write piano legato, right? And they will make everything connect. It's such a cool idea. I mean, I really love, like, like the, yeah, so obviously the beginning was first clarinet, so it has to be marked. But leggermente all around, right? Yeah, and you could even be throwing in first bassoon doubling the cellos, right? And then second bassoon playing this nice smooth line. You'd want to go to two separate staves if you did that. Yeah, and then this is so cool, just the big push right in here. I think that you need more support on these wind lines. I mean, alto saxophone is nice and strong, but I would say I'd do A flutes above, right? And if you really want it to surge, I would add first and second violins doubling there, right? And have your middle strings and lower strings doubling what's going on here in the brass, right? I think it just to give it a better, bigger kind of tutti sound. But if you really want it stripped back, it's not going to hurt it. It's just your melody notes are just not that strong, right? Yeah, but I love this. Bum, bum, bum. And then you have your little harp. And remember I said gushing chords, right? Hand over hand over, 3 octaves. And so cool. Pyom, 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 pyom. So nice. And then answering. Bum, bum, bum. Yeah. All right, and we're... Yeah. Yeah, so... Yeah, it's kind of more band-like composition here, like with the brass and so on, and just a touch of harp right in here. Yeah, I mean, there's some really cool little contrasts and so on. But I love the way that you really draw back here. I think that that's nicely done. Right. Okay, so now back to the original B section. What happened here? We had oboe solo, and then going into trading off, right? And then trading off to flute, and this, we had a little error there in the spelling. Supported by clarinets and bassoons, a touch of timpani, right? And then as things progressed forwards, the violins came in, and so on. I recommended that you bring in the winds and the brass a little earlier, continuing on with winds, like just to try to make it fuller and make it more of a solid tutti, right? But nice horn and trombone scoring here. I think you could even add more trombone, right? Okay, so the recapitulation, same pitch, or same, not same pitch, but the same idea on oboe, da 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 dum, and then clarinet, and we don't need the alto sax, so it was just clarinet this time, right? But yeah, and that's really good to go to da 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 da, and then just to go straight to flute, but you should end the phrase in the oboe, right? On the G sharp. Da 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 da. Then this is cool. See, this is much more in line with what I've got in my evaluation criteria. Developing, progressing in energy and timbre, and like here, like you have a little push here with trombones and so on, and then kind of gets into this. This is sort of like horn scoring right in here, right? So I mean, bring in the horns. Don't leave that gap there. As things build forward and get more and more intense and so on, I mean, you need more winds. You need, and swap this, right? So forte here, fortissimo in the second bar, and just really build towards in all the instruments, right? And I don't think you can go wrong, right? And then the recapitulation of C. Let's jump back for C. Yeah, da 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 da. So oboe over clarinet, right? With a little bit of flute in there, a little ineffectual, but not totally useless. And then bassoon, and then answered by oboe and saxophone over clarinet, and this cute little chorale here in the winds, right? Flute over clarinet, and so on. And then there was kind of a drop out here with the pizzicato, and then like going over the top there, and so on, right? And then you had a little bit of harp in there. Okay, so now we have once again oboe over clarinet, da 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 da, and it's nice the higher register. You know, it just really makes things sound nice and different. And then bassoon here, you should be going back to bass clef, right? And then because like in here, this was intended to be in bass clef, right? A C fifth going to an F third, but since you are still in tenor clef here, it's totally the wrong notes. I'll leave it up to you to decide what that is. But anyhow, yeah, it's just yeah, all right. But at least here the clarinet starts at the right place. But doesn't it get to resolve? Right? Da 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 da. Right. So it just fix all this. Put this in the horns. A little bit more support here, maybe from strings. And here you resolve. It's great. But here you don't resolve once again. So resolve, right? And I like the chords here in harp. Once again, bass clef, and make it maybe nice, big, long, gushing chords, right? These really are spread out apart from each other. It's not that effectual, but big rippling chord over 3 octaves would be great. And slurs, right? Da da, right? This isn't enough the way it's scored. Da 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 da. And you know what? I mean, I think you're gonna have to go like. Remember I talked about the fact that this doesn't really move, right? We just kind of go over and over the same register over and over again, right? And then we sort of compound the error by coming over the top, leaving the bassoon entrance just almost invisible, right? And by the time people realize that it's happening, they're already focusing on the pizzicato and the strings and so on. They're looking at the wrong place, right? So yeah, so I recommend just giving this to the flutes. I know you want it to be in clarinet, but like flutes coming down, and maybe clarinet and so on, and then just don't have this stuff coming over the top. Just continue to go downwards, right? Maybe bassoon can come in, and along with the alto sax, and just yeah, I think that you can, yeah, right. And once again, treble clef, right? And cool little timpani thing, boom, ba boom, or bum, bum, dun. Yeah, very cool. Da da da. Could there be some slurs here? Ta 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 da 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 da. Correct the D naturals in here. Yeah. And then yeah, definitely slurs here, and you want this to be smooth. And then just line slurs, and maybe don't do this sort of opposite direction thing and then same direction. It's not the greatest thing for harpists. They can do it, but it's just it's annoying. And then accents at the end. We're sort of losing touch with the little there are still these little bum 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 that got left out, right? Those should be in here somewhere, right? I'm not seeing them. So put them in brass or strings or whatever, right? Because then otherwise these chords at the end don't make any sense. And if you're going to go bonk, 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 bonk with a big sforzando at the end, then I think that everybody should be involved in all the parts, right? All right. Back to D. And actually a little bit before. Da 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 da. And this is so cool. Flutes and alto sax. Da, 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 bum, bum. And I already talked about how the sax is just going to sit right on top of the flutes in terms of its timbre and its projection and everything else. Really going to dominate here. Now, if you are happy with the flutes really being subsidiary and almost not audible at all, great. If you aren't happy with that, then it should be a clarinet part, right? Or clarinets, right? Which will work better with and balance better with saxophones anyways, because they are both single reed instruments. And add some slurs here, and I would say at this point, considering how much weight and how the balance is, I wouldn't be averse to this being doubled by bassoon, right? Yeah, and then of course the horn part right in here is very, very cool. Slurring, please. And of course slurring in these other parts. Then we talked about this and how this is so much better as a flute part, right? So if this were clarinet, right, and then ending, everybody comes to an end with a chord here, all the parts that happened previously end with like a little eighth note or a quarter note, right? And then just subito piano with everybody, and this being in flute, then you get a beautiful balance with the harp, and just the radiance just works better, right? And if you got pluck, 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 just leave this out with the harp, right? There are people are probably going to comment there that this could be alternated between C to E flat, between B sharp to D sharp, right? So you could get the that little sort of tremolo effect. But then what do you do when you get to this D natural here, right? So maybe it's just better to leave it the way that it is. And then here, I would say don't even bother with this. Da 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 da. This would be better off pizzicato in your violas and second violin and so on. Turn this into pizzicato, this da 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 da, and just have your harp continue on doing patterns, right? So that's where this goes to the harp, right? Or it could be an octave higher or wherever, right? Just easy. It's easier to hear an octave higher than this, right? But nice, I like the scoring in here, and the oboes plus the clarinets in this middle register here is really nice. And then da 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 da, end on the downbeat with these previous instruments, da 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 da, and then you come in with your harp, plunk pluck pluck pluck, and then as I said before, this needs to be more active, whether it's like a little rolled chord at the beginning. Or it's octaves, or both. You could have a little rolled chord, pluck, 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 rolled chord, pluck, pluck, roll, blah, blah, bum, 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 and so on, right? And I think that would work really, really great and help to differentiate it from the other pizzicato happening in your lower strings here, lower and middle. And then, of course, slurs, right? But then, you know what I'm saying? It's way better. And then I like the trading off clarinets here, right? Okay, so keeping that simple, that works for me. But then here, I think, like I mentioned before, I think you could be building energy, more strings, horns starting off as a soft pad behind, pushing forwards, and then everybody rushing downwards to a forte in the strings and winds, mezzo forte in the brass, or even more, to a fortissimo in winds and strings, right? And then a forte, and then push forwards and then back off, right? And you could have more brass in here, right? More bass trombone. There's barely any tuba stuff in here at all. You know what I mean? Like, you barely use it anywhere, right? In fact, we've got it here, right? So how many places do you use the tuba? It's not there. There are a couple of notes. Yeah, there's bass trombone, getting that C. Yeah, so here's just like a few notes on tuba. So, if it's a case like that, where there's just like 2 bars of tuba, or just a few here at the end, yeah. Either figure out more stuff for the tuba to do, or see if you can split it up, amongst the other instruments, and just cut the tuba part. It's really, just barely being used. And those are my thoughts on this movement. So, as I've been doing this evaluation this morning and really kind of just enjoying the hell out of myself and looking at this and thinking about it's okay that this is a much longer evaluation and it's perfectly appropriate and so on. I think that the best thing to do with this last entry is to not worry about an intermission, but just to have two nice long separate evaluations for one for each movement. All right. So I think that I'm just going to stop there and end by really saying just like that I have seen you grow artistically, Rafa, and there's still a lot of things that you need to work on in terms of like finalizing your scores and learning about balance and just some basics like making sure your slurs are good and just proofreading your pitches and so on. But look, I mean, I've seen some very professional work as well that had some problems with that. So it's no slight on you or your professionalism and so on. But just to notice that you have really gotten so much, like you've improved so much with these evaluations, and all the way to this point where you had a chance to score the entire sonata, and you did so much effort, you put so much into it, and so much imagination and dedication, and so many innovative ideas. You put it out there whether it worked or not, and wow, I'm so impressed. So I really enjoyed this, and I'm so glad you sent it to me. And I think you have waited the longest out of anybody. Obviously, since this is the last entry of 2 years delayed orchestration challenge evaluation phase. So yeah, I mean this was a huge one. I might have to dial it back a bit if we do this again. And I've had a few plans thrown at me, including something that could get big again, but it doesn't need to be too huge for me. So yeah, so I just really appreciate you, Rafa, being so supportive back when this was being written, and you being a supporter at the top level and sending me something so huge. Like the support at that level is not just obviously a donation to the channel, which is extremely helpful in me being able to stay focused on it, but it's also like your dedication of putting something out there and writing and scoring something that is so enormous and so intense that gives people a lot to think about and a lot to reflect on in their own scoring, and how they might do things differently than you did, or how they might see something in your work that gives them an idea for something in their own work, right? That they get inspired by what you're doing. And I see a lot of the potential for that in this, absolutely. And especially the use of the alto saxophone. I think that you could definitely do so much more with it. Like that was the charm of it for me, and like just seeing every possible place where things needed a little bit more support, and there was the alto saxophone, and you could just use it if you had a thought to use it, right? So all those were really, really great things about this score that got me thinking, and hopefully people as well out there. So thank you so much, Rafa. And we've communicated over the years, and you've always been very kind, and you've been incredibly patient with me trying to get this together and understanding, and that I appreciate hugely. So with that, I will just turn it over to the rest of the community to make comments on, if you haven't even already. And I know I'm seeing a lot of people are listening to the very last second with these, and I appreciate that too. So please let Rafa know what you thought, and constructive comments only, please. This is what this is all about. Like everybody helping everybody out, and it's not a contest. It's not a critique. It is feedback and building people so that they get better and better. That's all I've ever dreamed of with this channel. So I will probably see you tomorrow. I'm going to release these one day at a time. So this is going to come out today, and then tomorrow just before the end of the year, we will see the very, very last video in this huge series, well over 100 videos and 100 hours, and it's just incredible. It's sprawling. So thanks again, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow. And once again, thank you, Rafa.